Afghanistan is a country where history has never been shaped by people alone. Here, geography itself has always been the main actor. Long before empires rose and fell, before borders were drawn or nations were named, the land determined how power could exist. Towering above the region stands the Hindu Kush mountain range, harsh, jagged, and unforgiving. These mountains slice through the heart of the country, separating valleys from one another like natural walls. For centuries, these valleys developed in isolation. Each became its own world, governed not by distant capitals, but by local customs, tribal councils, and unwritten codes of honor. Loyalty was personal, not institutional. Authority was negotiated, not imposed. And survival depended on knowledge of the land. To outsiders, Afghanistan often appeared fragmented. But to those who lived there, this fragmentation was a form of resilience. To the north flows the ancient river Oxus, known today as the Amu Darya. In antiquity, it was more than a river. It was a frontier between worlds. On one side lay the settled civilizations of Central Asia. On the other, the rugged highlands that resisted permanent control. The river carried water, trade, and culture, but it also marked limits, lines that empires struggled to cross and defend. Yet Afghanistan was never isolated from history. Paradoxically, it was both remote and central. This land sat at the crossroads of Eurasia. Through narrow mountain passes, most famously the Khyber Pass, flowed the great arteries of the ancient world. Caravans moved between India, Persia, China, and the Mediterranean. Along with silk, spices, horses, and precious metals came religions, philosophies, military tactics, and systems of governance. Afghanistan did not simply receive these influences. It filtered them, adapted them, and reshaped them. Every empire that entered the region believed it could master it. Persian kings saw it as a vital frontier. Greek conquerors viewed it as a bridge to India. Later, Islamic caliphates, Mongol armies, European empires, and modern superpowers all made the same assumption, that control could be achieved by force, infrastructure, or ideology. Time and again, they were proven wrong. Armies could occupy cities, but cities were never the whole country. Mountain passes could be seized, but supply lines could not always be protected. Victories on open plains meant little in terrain where a small group of fighters, armed with local knowledge, could outlast a much larger force. In Afghanistan, power has always been conditional. Rulers who respected local traditions, shared resources fairly, and secured roads and water could govern, sometimes for generations. Those who ignored tribal structures, imposed heavy taxes, or ruled from afar inevitably faced resistance. Not organized rebellion at first, but quiet noncompliance. Then sabotage, then revolt. This is why Afghanistan has often been called the graveyard of empires. Not because invaders were defeated in a single dramatic battle, but because they slowly lost control, legitimacy, and will. Understanding Afghanistan means abandoning the idea of absolute rule. It means recognizing that geography here is not a backdrop, but a force, one that rewards flexibility and punishes arrogance. This land does not submit easily. It endures. And every chapter of Afghanistan's history begins with this truth. Those who ignore the land will never rule it. By the 6th century BCE, the lands of modern Afghanistan were drawn into the orbit of the Achaemenid Empire, the first true superpower of the ancient world. Under Cyrus the Great and later Darius I, Persia did not simply conquer territory, it organized it. The region known as Bactria became one of the empire's most important eastern provinces. Its value was not symbolic. Bactria supplied grain, horses, precious metals, and, most importantly, access. Whoever controlled these lands controlled the gateways between Central Asia, the Iranian plateau, and the Indian subcontinent. Unlike later empires, the Achaemenids understood that Afghanistan could not be ruled by force alone. The Persian solution was administrative genius, the satrapy system. Instead of replacing local elites, Persian kings co-opted them. Satraps, regional governors, were often drawn from established noble families or closely supervised by them. Taxes were standardized, not arbitrary. Roads were maintained. Trade was protected. In exchange, loyalty was expected, not total obedience. This balance was fragile, but effective. Persian authority in Afghanistan relied on control of mountain passes rather than total occupation. Garrisons were placed at strategic points, not deep in hostile valleys. Tribute moved along secured routes, while local communities retained autonomy in their daily lives. Culturally, the Achaemenid Empire was remarkably tolerant. Iranian languages dominated administration, but local tongues survived. Religious traditions, early Zoroastrian beliefs alongside indigenous cults, were allowed to coexist. The Persian king ruled as the king of kings, not as a destroyer of identities. For several generations, this model worked. But even Persian power had limits. Distance strained communication. Rebellions flared when governors overreached or when taxation became excessive. The empire depended heavily on the personal authority of its rulers, and when that authority weakened, cracks spread quickly. By the late 4th century BCE, Persia faced a challenger unlike any before. From the west came a young Macedonian king with a revolutionary army and an unstoppable momentum. His name was Alexander, and Afghanistan was about to test him more severely than any battlefield he had yet encountered. When Alexander of Macedon crossed into the eastern provinces of the Persian Empire in the late 4th century BCE, he believed he was nearing the end of his campaign. Persia had fallen. Its capitals were burned or surrendered. To Alexander, Bactria and the lands beyond the Hindu Kush were meant to be a final pursuit, a clean conclusion to a brilliant conquest. Instead, Afghanistan became the most difficult chapter of his life. Here, Alexander did not face grand armies drawn up on open plains. He faced something far more dangerous: fragmented resistance. Local leaders avoided decisive battles. Fighters melted into the mountains, attacked supply lines, and vanished. Victory could not be declared because there was no single enemy to defeat. For the first time, Alexander was forced to adapt. He abandoned the idea of quick conquest and shifted toward long-term control. Across the region, he founded fortified cities, many named Alexandria, designed not only as military garrisons but as administrative hubs. These cities anchored Macedonian power in hostile terrain, securing trade routes and mountain passes. But steel alone was not enough. Alexander adopted Persian customs, married into local nobility, and encouraged his officers to do the same. This was not idealism, it was strategy. He understood that legitimacy in Afghanistan could not be imposed. It had to be negotiated. Even so, resistance never fully ended. After Alexander's death, his empire shattered. Yet in Afghanistan, something unexpected survived. Greek rule did not collapse immediately. Instead, it evolved. Out of the chaos emerged the Greco-Bactrian kingdom, one of the most extraordinary cultural experiments in ancient history. Greek rulers governed a predominantly Iranian and Central Asian population, far from the Mediterranean world they came from. And instead of erasing local traditions, they fused with them. Greek remained the language of administration and coinage. Cities followed Hellenistic layouts, but religious life transformed. Under kings like Menander I, Greek rulers engaged deeply with Buddhism. According to tradition, Menander himself converted, becoming known in Buddhist texts as a wise and just king. This encounter changed art forever. For the first time, the Buddha was depicted in human form, not as a symbol, but as a figure shaped by Greek ideals of proportion, realism, and expression. Draped robes, naturalistic faces, and classical poses merged with spiritual symbolism. This style, known as Greco-Buddhist art, spread across Asia, influencing imagery from Afghanistan to Japan. Coins from this era tell the same story. Greek gods appeared alongside Buddhist symbols. Inscriptions were written in multiple languages. Identity was layered, not singular. But the Greco-Bactrian world was fragile. Cut off from Greece, Surrounded by nomadic pressures and dependent on trade routes, the kingdom struggled to survive. Internal divisions weakened it. Steppe tribes pressed from the north. By the 1st century BCE, Greek political power faded, yet its cultural legacy endured. Afghanistan had once again proven something fundamental. Conquest could fail, but exchange could succeed. Empires that tried to dominate the land vanished. Those that adapted left something behind. The stage was now set for a new power, one that would turn Afghanistan from a contested frontier into the beating heart of Eurasian trade. By the 1st century CE, the political landscape of Central Asia had shifted once again. Out of the migrations of nomadic peoples from the Eurasian steppe emerged a new power, the Kushan Empire. Unlike many conquerors before them, the Kushans did not treat Afghanistan as a frontier. They made it their core. From cities such as Bactra, Kabul, and Begram, the Kushans ruled a vast realm stretching from northern India to the edges of China and Central Asia. Afghanistan stood at its center, transformed from a battleground into a hub. This period marked one of the greatest eras of prosperity in the region's history. The Kushans controlled key segments of the Silk Road, the interconnected network of trade routes linking east and west. Through Afghan cities passed Chinese silk, Indian spices, Roman glassware, Mediterranean silver, and Central Asian horses. Taxes on trade, not conquest, funded the empire. But trade alone did not sustain Kushan power. They understood something many empires did not. Stability comes from inclusion. The Kushans ruled over a mosaic of cultures, languages, and religions. Rather than enforcing uniformity, they embraced diversity. Greek, Bactrian, Sanskrit, and Prakrit appeared on coins and inscriptions. Local elites were integrated into governance. Loyalty was rewarded, not coerced. Religion flourished under Kushan patronage. Buddhism, in particular, experienced unprecedented support. Monasteries were built along trade routes, not only as spiritual centers, but as safe havens for merchants. These institutions functioned as banks, warehouses, and caravanserais, storing wealth and ensuring trust across long distances. Afghanistan became a spiritual crossroads. Zoroastrian traditions persisted. Hindu influences flowed from India. Greek philosophical ideas lingered, and Buddhism evolved into a universal faith capable of crossing borders. From Afghan valleys, Buddhist monks carried teachings along the Silk Road to Central Asia, China, Korea, and beyond. The artistic legacy of this era was extraordinary. The Gandhara school of art, centered in what is now eastern Afghanistan and northern Pakistan, reached its peak. Sculptors depicted the Buddha with serene expressions, flowing robes, and classical proportions inspired by Greek art. Corinthian columns framed monasteries. Mythological motifs from multiple cultures coexisted in a single visual language. This was not cultural confusion. It was synthesis. Under the Kushans, Afghanistan was not conquered by the world. It connected it. Yet even this golden age was temporary. As trade routes shifted and external pressures increased, Kushan power declined. New empires rose to the west and east. The flow of wealth slowed. Political unity fractured. But the foundations laid during this era would endure for centuries. Afghanistan had proven that when roads are protected, water is shared, and diversity is respected, the land thrives. The next transformation would be profound, not merely political or economic, but spiritual. A new faith was approaching, one that would reshape Afghanistan's identity and bind it to a wider world once again. The arrival of Islam in Afghanistan was not a single moment of conquest, but a long and complex transformation. Beginning in the 7th century, the new faith entered the region gradually, carried by traders, scholars, missionaries, and only later by armies. Unlike earlier empires, Islam did not arrive merely as a ruling system. It arrived as a civilizational framework, one that could unify diverse peoples under shared beliefs, laws, and cultural practices. Over time, this framework reshaped Afghan society at every level. At first, Islamic influence was strongest in cities and along trade routes. Merchants adopted the faith. Local rulers converted for political and economic reasons. Mosques appeared beside older religious sites. Gradually, Islamic law and customs blended with existing traditions rather than erasing them outright. By the 10th century, Afghanistan had become a major center of the Islamic world. Under the Ghaznavid dynasty, cities like Ghazni flourished as capitals of learning and power. The Ghaznavids projected their influence deep into the Indian subcontinent, spreading Islam while accumulating immense wealth. That wealth flowed back into Afghanistan, funding architecture, poetry, and scholarship. Ghazni became a jewel of the medieval world, adorned with palaces, libraries, and towering minarets. Persian literature thrived. Scholars, poets, and theologians found patronage at court. Afghanistan was no longer just a crossroads of trade. It was a producer of culture. Following the Ghaznavids, the Ghurid dynasty rose from Afghanistan's mountainous heartland. Unlike their predecessors, the Ghurids came from the highlands themselves, embodying the fusion of local identity and Islamic rule. They expanded aggressively, laying foundations for Islamic states in northern India that would last for centuries. Yet even at the height of medieval power, Afghanistan remained true to its historical pattern. Central authority depended on fairness and balance. When rulers respected local elites, maintained infrastructure, and upheld justice, stability followed. When they overtaxed, ignored tribal dynamics, or ruled through fear, rebellion was never far behind. Islam provided unity, but did not eliminate regional autonomy. Afghanistan during this era was not a monolithic state. It was a network of cities, valleys, and communities bound together by faith, trade, and mutual necessity. The strength of medieval Afghanistan lay not in absolute control, but in adaptive governance. This adaptability allowed Afghan society to endure even catastrophic shocks, because soon a storm would arrive from the east, one that would destroy cities, depopulate regions, and test the limits of survival itself. The Mongols were coming. In the early 13th century, Afghanistan faced one of the most devastating invasions in its history. From the Mongolian steppe came the armies of Genghis Khan, moving with a speed and brutality unseen before. Cities that resisted were annihilated. Irrigation systems, the lifeblood of Afghan agriculture, were destroyed. Entire regions were depopulated. Centers of learning and trade that had flourished for centuries vanished in a matter of months. For Afghanistan, the Mongol invasion was not merely a political collapse. It was a civilizational trauma. And yet, the land endured. As Mongol power fragmented, local structures slowly re-emerged. Trade routes recovered. Cities were rebuilt. New powers rose, most notably under Timur Tamerlane, whose empire once again placed Afghanistan at the crossroads of Asia. Timurid cities became centers of art, architecture, and Persian culture, proving once more that destruction was never the end of the story here. But the early modern period brought a new kind of pressure. By the 18th and 19th centuries, Afghanistan stood between expanding global empires. To the south and east lay British India. To the north, Imperial Russia advanced steadily through Central Asia. Afghanistan became the centerpiece of what historians would later call the Great Game. Neither empire sought to fully absorb Afghanistan. Instead, they wanted control without responsibility, influence without occupation. The country was reshaped into a buffer state, its borders drawn by foreign powers with little regard for ethnic or tribal realities. The British attempted direct military intervention several times. Each time, the result was the same: early success followed by catastrophic retreat. Foreign armies could enter Afghanistan. They could not pacify it. By the early 20th century, Afghanistan formally secured its independence. But independence did not bring stability. Modernization efforts clashed with conservative traditions. Kings and governments rose and fell. Reform moved faster than society could absorb. Then came the Cold War. In 1979, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, attempting to prop up a failing regime and reshape the country along ideological lines. What followed was a decade-long war that devastated infrastructure, displaced millions, and militarized society. When the Soviets withdrew, the conflict did not end. Civil war followed. Then came the rise of the Taliban, promising order but imposing rigid control. After 2001, another global power entered Afghanistan, convinced, once again, that it could succeed where others had failed. 2 decades later, history repeated itself. Foreign forces withdrew. The political system collapsed. Afghanistan entered yet another period of uncertainty, marked by economic crisis, humanitarian hardship, and international isolation. Families adapted as they always had. Informal education networks emerged. Women quietly sustained healthcare and schooling. Communities relied on kinship and tradition when formal systems failed. Afghanistan did not break. It adjusted. Through conquest, ideology, and abandonment, one pattern remained constant. External powers came with plans, timelines, and certainty. Afghanistan responded with patience, endurance, and memory. The land had seen this before. Afghanistan is often described with a single phrase: the graveyard of empires. But this phrase is misleading. Empires were not destroyed in Afghanistan in one decisive moment. They did not fall because of a single battle or a single mistake. They failed slowly, through misunderstanding, exhaustion, and the erosion of legitimacy. What history shows is not that Afghanistan is unconquerable, but that it cannot be ruled in ways that ignore its realities. Every successful period in Afghan history shared common principles. Roads were protected, water systems were maintained, taxes were predictable and fair. Local leaders were included rather than excluded. Power flowed outward, not only downward. Every failure followed the opposite pattern. When rulers attempted to centralize authority without consent, resistance emerged. When outsiders imposed systems without understanding tribal structures, those systems collapsed. When ideology replaced pragmatism, governance failed. Afghanistan has never rejected change. It has rejected arrogance. From Persian administrators to Greek kings, from Buddhist patrons to Islamic scholars, from medieval dynasties to modern states, those who adapted to the land endured. Those who tried to reshape it in their own image did not. The Afghan people are not passive survivors of history. They are active participants in it. Their resilience is not accidental. It is learned, inherited, and refined across generations. In villages and cities alike, families continue to adapt. Informal economies replace broken institutions. Education survives without classrooms. Medicine is practiced without hospitals. Women, often unseen, sustain social life in the hardest conditions. This is not romantic endurance. It is necessity. The central question of Afghanistan's future is the same one it has faced for thousands of years. How can sovereignty become opportunity? History offers no simple answers, but it offers guidance. Stability does not come from domination. It comes from trust. Prosperity does not come from extraction. It comes from connection. And peace does not come from force alone. It comes from legitimacy. Afghanistan stands today as it has always stood, shaped by mountains, sustained by people, and defined by its ability to endure. Empires pass. The land remains.